Good day. Thank you for joining us here for our July 3rd Tuesday at 3 webcast series event, Email Security and Compliance. I am Alan Falcon, CEO of Cumulus Global. Here at Cumulus Global, we help small and mid-size organizations get the most value out of their existing IT and new cloud-forward solutions and managed cloud services. Thank you for joining us. We always appreciate you taking time out of your busy day and week to participate in these sessions, whether you're watching us here live on the third Tuesday of the month at 3 p.m. Eastern, or you're watching this recording on demand. As is typical with all of our webcasts, a couple of housekeeping items. The audio is muted to prevent any background noise from interfering. So if at any time you have a question or a comment, along the top or right-hand side of your screen, there's some icons. One of them opens the questions window. That's the best way to go. It lets me track the questions. I'll answer them along the way, and if not, we've got plenty of time for Q&A after the presentation portion. As with all of our webcasts, this session is being recorded. We generally have it up on our available through our website within 24 hours. We will, once it's up, send you a link. Feel free to share that with any colleagues if you feel they might find the content useful. Related to the topic today, when we talk about email security and compliance, a couple of resources we have in our resource center. If you've never visited the resource center, it's good to take a look. A library of documents, our blog. You can subscribe to get daily or weekly news around cloud computing for small businesses, as well as the ability to sign up for webcasts and webcast recordings. So recent posts in our blog include a recent one about the Kaseya attack and the impact that has not only on our industry as IT providers, but you as our customers. An overall state of the SMB cybersecurity environment, and a recent blog post about 3 security threats you know and 1 you should know if you don't already. In our library, we've got a couple of ebooks and white papers on the state of security for small and mid-sized businesses, a 2020 report looking back on the last 12 months as far as breaches, and a white paper from Google on Google Workspace security as they've updated their products and packaging and pricing. They've updated the security information. To get a list of other resources and information on our website, simply go to the website and search for CPR. We'll give you a little bit more information about what CPR means as we get further into the session today. And speaking of getting into the topics, just to set a little bit of context, in where we are and why we're bringing up email security and compliance again. Currently right now, industry tracking lets us know that right now 1 in 5 SMBs report being attacked by ransomware. Doesn't necessarily mean those attacks are successful, but they've seen it. And we know that of those attacks, 79% happen because of compromised credentials. That's how the cyber criminals get in or how they do their work. When you think about that 79% because of compromised credentials, 90%, more than 90% actually, of successful attacks start with an email. And so this sets the context for why email security and compliance is so important to us. So knowing that, there are 2 concepts or 2 ways of approaching security and compliance. They go hand in hand. One is to look at your system or your systems, if you will, and the services you're using. The other really relates to the user, their actions, and how you protect the user. So when we talk about email security compliance from a system standpoint, we're looking at encryption, your system's identity and reputation, how you do anti-spam and antivirus, the role of advanced threat protection, and dealing with both not only the inbound threat, but the outbound traffic and outbound threats as well. At the user level and conceptually, it's again identity and access management. That's really about the individual user and their user accounts. Message level encryption, so encryption at the individual email message level. All of the human factors and behavioral factors that come into having a secure environment, as well as digital rights management. And so what we're going to do today is sort of walk through these 2 concepts, and we're going to start over on the system side of email security. And so we're going to look at that encryption and the other things I mentioned as a way in, and we'll sort of start at the bottom of the stack and move our way upward. We'll talk about email security, and then we'll jump in at the end a number of slides, or a couple of slides at least, on compliance and what that means and how all of that fits into this as well. So we start with email security and systems. We're going to start with the basics, which is encryption at rest. And this really applies to whether your email is provided by an on-premise server or a hosted server, or whether you're using an email service. And so for companies that have a need or prefer to have a physical email server or virtualized email server on site, or if you're using a hosted server, right? So you've got an Exchange server, for example, in a hosted data center, whether that's a physical machine or virtual machine in that data center. It's not just enough to fully encrypt your email content within the email database of that server when it's there being stored. You should also be encrypting your underlying disk space, because there can be attacks that get into this at the system level and then are able to extract that database. If it's not encrypted, it'll be readable if it's connected to an email server that the hackers own. When you look at an email service, whether it's Google Workspace or Microsoft 365, Exchange Online, and even others from major, email service providers like Rackspace or Intermedia, that encryption at rest should be provided by your service provider, whoever you're getting the service from. That should be taken care of for you. So that takes care of encryption at rest. And again, if you're running on-premise or hosted servers, then encryption at rest also means you have to understand how you're going to back up and recover your data, given that it's encrypted, and have all of that components integrated. So it adds a level of complexity to your system administration and management tasks. When we look at encryption in motion, the most fundamental way in the email world, there's really two things. We're really talking about the transport layer security. So what's the encryption and the security as data is moving through the transport layer of the network from one place to another? And so at the very basic level, there's two tools. TLS encryption, which generally is used between servers, email servers or services, but can be used between the client and the server as well. And SSL encryption, which you're familiar with. It's your HTTPS protocol. It's port 443, and that's really for web-based access to email. And some email clients will use port 433 for their communications and use those protocols as well. The thing about TLS encryption and that server to server in particular is typically it's policy-based. And the policy is often no, don't do it, which obviously we recommend against. But if you are going to have TLS encryption in place, policy-based will generally be if the recipient accepts TLS encryption, then the sender will send it encrypted. If the recipient doesn't, then you're not going to send it encryption. So it really depends on what the recipient can do. Similarly, the next step up is if you have specific senders that you're communicating, specific recipients that need or require TLS, such as, for example, if you do work with the government in law enforcement and you need CGIS compliant, you might be required to have TLS encryption for all traffic to and from certain domains. And so it can be if the recipient is X, then send with TLS encryption no matter what. And if something's wrong with the encryption on the receipt the decryption on the receiving side, the mail is going to bounce. And so you can have that sort of conditional. There's also taking that to the next level, which is a static configuration where you configure a server service to only send and receive TLS encrypted email with specific domains. And again, it's more restrictive, it's more maintenance, but it's highly managed. And so you have those options there. So moving from the transport layer up, hopefully most of you are familiar with the concept of SPF, or Sender Policy Framework. This is an entry in your DNS record, which is what the domain name service, how the internet takes a name and makes it an address and knows how to forward your information. And it effectively defines which IP addresses may send email on behalf of your domain. And so it will be your own email service if you use a marketing tool like a MailChimp, or Marketo or Salesforce. Those IP addresses can be included. If you've got a system, a custom application or a business system like an ERP system that sends out emails that come from your domain, that system would be there. If you're using QuickBooks to email invoice, that should be included in there as well. Why you want this in place is because it helps prevent others from using your domain to send malicious emails. And therefore, it improves the deliverability of your email to your intended recipients. And really, where it comes into play is if the recipient requires seeing that SPF record in order to receive email from you. And so you create the SPF record in case someone you're sending email to requires it. And then it's really up to them how they're using or how you tell them you want it used. So if you're sending email to company XYZ and they don't require SPF and you don't have an SPF record, great, your email comes in. However they determine whether or not it's spam will work. If company XYZ requires SPF and you don't have that record in your DNS, then every single message you sent will be marked as spam. Part of the structure of the sender policy framework is a tag that's in the DNS entry called the all tag. And that really instructs those strict recipients on how to process email from any source that you authorize, any legitimate source, and how it's going to process them from any server or IP address that's not in your SPF record that's part of your SPF list. And so the -all is a fail. You're telling the recipient to reject all emails from servers not listed in SPF. The -all is a soft fail. And you're telling the recipient, hey, accept this email, but mark it as a soft fail if it's not coming from one of the servers or the IP addresses, if you will, in our SPF record. Now, what's interesting is you think, well, why I would just want, -all and the full fail, because that's the strictest and that's the most, you'd think it'd be the most reliable. The problem is a lot of times, when you're using third-party tools, sending mail on behalf and from your domain, that the IP addresses they use aren't static, they're dynamic. And they're going to change over time as that vendor brings up and takes down servers that might be relaying messages, or if emails getting routed out of their network from different locations on the network. So for example, Google with Google Workspace recommends that your SPF record have -all so that if emails getting routed out of the Google network in a way that's atypical for some reason, and the IP address happens not to be in the active include file that's cached as part of your DNS record, because DNS takes time to propagate, your email is not going to be flagged as spam. And so they recommend that soft fail rather than the hard fail. What that does, however, is create a small window of opportunity for intelligent hackers who know how to effectively spoof IP addresses to still pretend they're you and send emails if it's coming from your domain. And so how does it work? Again, it's all about preventing unauthorized use of your domain. It is spoofable, and therefore it's really a basic level of email security. And the process here is outlined in this graph where you send it on the inbound email server that's receiving your message is going to do the lookup of the SPF record in your DNS. And based on that authentication and reputation data, will decide whether or not it goes to the inbox, the junk mail, the quarantine, or whether it's blocked and completed, blocked and deleted completely. The next step up above SPF of added security is known as Domain Keys Identified Method, or DKIM. And this is an internet standard. Not everyone uses it, but it's becoming more popular and it's becoming more necessary. And so what is it? DKIM gives the receiver of an email message the ability to verify that the email was sent by an authorized owner of the domain. And effectively what it does is it adds, as you transmit your email with DKIM active, an encrypted digital header is added to the email message. And from that point on, any component of the email message, including attachments, is effectively validated. So the recipient will know that parts of your email, as well as any attachments, have not been modified since they were sent. And that certification improves reliability and dramatically reduces the chance that legitimate mail from your email from your domain is not seen as spam. It also will highlight email that may be spoofed at an IP address level and that email will be more likely to be recognized as spam and not let through. And so it further protects, your deliverability as well as protects your domain. In most instances, DKIM is server level, so it's entirely transparent and visible to the end user. It's something that happens at the system level. And so here's a simplified flowchart of how it works. When you set up DKIM, you publish, there's a public key that registers with the DNS server. The recipient gets that private key signed. They retrieve the public key. They use that to match. And if it matches, it goes to the recipient inbox. So again, it's an added level of validation that lets the recipient know that the email is coming from who they expect it to, that it's not damaging. Now, certainly in configuring your email service, you want it to process DKIM messages inbound so that if people are attaching that header, you're processing it and following the guidance. Now, you take SPF and DKIM and they're good and they're not perfect. In fact, one of the things that they have trouble preventing is business email compromise. And that's the type of phishing attack where the CFO gets an email that really looks like it came from the CEO, right? That it's an internal email message. And so those types and other types of attack need something more. And that's where DMARC comes in. And here I'm starting with the acronym because it's long. It's domain-based message authentication, reporting, and conformance. And what that is really a full authentication policy and reporting protocol. DMARC only works if you have SPF and DKIM in set up and running, and it adds linkage to the author domain name, so the from field. So now it's not just looking at the IP address, it's going to make sure that the from field of where it's being sent matches the IP addresses being used to send the email, right? And so this makes it much harder to spoof. Most spoofed emails, the from address will look like it's coming from the right place, but if you look deep into the headers, you actually see that it's not. Okay, so this catches those discrepancies. It also adds the ability to publish policies for the recipient on how to handle authentication failures. What do you want the recipient to do if the DKIM authentication fails? Do you want it to be blocked? Do you want it to be quarantined? Do you want it to be rejected? And the third component is reporting back from the receiver to the sender. Hey, we're receiving email that claims to be from you but isn't, and this is what we've done with it. So why do you want DMARC in place? Well, it lets you improve and monitor the protection of your domain from fraudulent email. It protects against that direct domain spoofing, phishing attacks, and business email compromise. So with DMARC added to the mix, you're not just protecting yourself as a sender, but you're also adding a level of protection as a receiver. And because it can prevent those business email compromise attacks and those internal phishing attacks, it gives you a higher level of protection and really minimizes the risk for entire classes of phishing and cyber attacks. It can detect unauthorized activity, not just externally, but internally as well. So DMARC can be configured in different ways for different groups of users within your domain to make sure, for example, that people outside of the marketing department aren't using the marketing systems, right? So that should you have a physical computer compromised through another means, that it can't be used, for example, from inside your domain to send out messages to other people. And again, it allows the recipient to report back to the sender so you can know if you have a problem or if your business has been or is under attack some way. So here, the process flow for DMARC is a little more complex. You can follow through the flow chart and see that for yourself. Typically DMARC gets deployed in a multi-phase deployment. As I mentioned earlier, SPF and DKIM must be in place. You then build your DMARC policies. You need to test them and track them for a period of time before you implement and pull the trigger. And what we do know from the industry, and this is an issue we're trying to solve and signing on partners that are working with us on this, is that about 50% of DMARC deployments are left unfinished. The policies get, the policies get created. They go into the testing phase and they sort of never finish the testing. They never pull the trigger so that the policies actually get put into play. Okay, and so one of the things we're working on as your managed cloud provider is bringing in expertise into the process so that the testing process goes smoothly. You as the operating company, as the client, are happy and are comfortable with it, so we can get it fully implemented and get it get it moved to you and get it up and running and get it working for you and protecting you. At this point, I'm going to stop with you the question, which was about DKIM. Does a sender's SMT server need a private key to sign the emails? So the question is, the service, yes, you do, and the services generally provide those capabilities, right? So Google Workspace will provide the private key. If you're using third-party services or systems and you want DKIM running for those senders as well, they would need to also provide the key, or they'd have to be routed through a service to provide that key. Okay, so sort of moving forward, we continue to move up the stack now. We've talked about how we're going to secure communications from our servers to your servers and vice versa. That really helps with your identity, your reputation management. We've talked about the encryption at rest and in motion. That's great. Now we're at the part we talk about anti-spam and antivirus. And this is old hat. We've been, anti-spam and antivirus solutions have been out there since the late 1990s and the mid 2000s. Anti-spam has been effectively provided, and antivirus is a cloud-based service since about 2005, 2006. And so when we talk about anti-spam, antivirus, we're really talking about preventing the receipt and activation of infected or harmful email messages. And that includes the message itself as well as any attachments. And why you want this in place is really old hat, right? Prevent malware or ransomware from being downloaded. In today's world, we're also looking to protect user identities and to avoid future attacks. And we want to protect company information and resources. And again, over 90% of cyber attacks that are going after people's identities are starting with an email message. And so how do you provide this protection? You're going to use an anti-spam and antivirus solution. Oftentimes it's included with the email server or system. There are companies that offer user level tools, plugins for Outlook, things of that nature. They're generally not as effective. They're more consumer oriented than the system level ones. And then there's third-party tools that offer enhanced capability as far as profiling, managing, avoiding false positives, avoiding false negatives, things of that nature. When we talk about anti-spam, antivirus, the real benchmark now is not the basic protection we're used to, right? We're used to saying, hey, this attachment has a certain profile that looks like there's a virus in it, or it says it's a Word document, but it's JavaScript. Let's block it, right? Very basic stuff. Advanced threat protection takes it to, really next gen, next level to prevent sophisticated cyber attacks that use emails in multiple ways. Okay, and why? Because today email attacks often appear to come from trusted sources, and your attackers are going to rely on, in fact, they're going to help behaviorally engineer user mistakes, user actions, right? So, we can, chances are the attackers have enough information about your company that they can send an email that looks and feels relevant. They can figure out who your bank is. They can figure out what services you use. They can send, oh, look, I want the CFO's identity. Oh, look, I know they're on LinkedIn. Oh, LinkedIn had a breach. Let me get some information. I now have enough to craft a phishing email that may look and feel like it came from LinkedIn about their account, and it's all going to feel and look relevant unless they're very, very careful, right? And so because of that, you really need a mechanism that says, we need to look at these, email messages. Given how busy we are and how quickly we go through our email messages as humans, we need technology to really look deeper and beyond, oh, it looks okay, to see if it really is. And so to do that, you need advanced threat protection services. And this is an add-on. Microsoft 365, the Business Premium Edition comes with advanced threat protection built in. Other versions of the business and some of the enterprise license, it's an add-on service. And what you really want are IP sender validation. So again, matching the information we as humans don't see in the headers with the from field, um, you know, executing back to make sure they're connected, as well as sandbox testing links and attachments. And when we talk about sandboxing, we're talking about a real-time process where you go beyond verifying, it's sent from where it's expected. You verify, that the links are going where they're expected. So a sandbox will actually open the email message in a safe, neutral environment. This is all done behind the scenes on the cloud. And we'll make sure that the links are going to what's expected based on the content and context of the message. Additionally, it's going to open up any attachments, right? So it's going to look and say, oh, this attachment is, it says it's a Word document, but it's really JavaScript. So, obviously it's a bad attachment. Ooh, but now here's an attachment that looks fine. I'm going to open it and see if there's any behavior that indicates there's executable code or malware built in. And if that's the case, I'm going to quarantine it or delete it and not deliver it to the user. And so it's a whole level threat of protection. Now, it does take a little bit of time. Sometimes as much as 300 milliseconds to 2 seconds of delay in email delivery. Small, minuscule, almost humanly unnoticeable delay to get the added protection from those types of threats. The last piece about sort of email security is the concept of inbound and outbound protection. And what do we mean when we talk about particularly outbound? Inbound's intuitive to us, right? Any email coming to me, I want to scan it. I'm going to quarantine it or delete it if it's not safe. I'm going to use my advanced threat protection. I'm going to sandbox it, going to nuke it, not deliver it if it's not safe. For outbound, you're really talking about protecting outbound messages in the same manner as inbound. And why do you want to do that? One, you want to prevent the spread of attacks in case of a local issue. In case you have a compromised machine or compromised identity, you don't want your systems to be used to propagate that attack, because it's going to propagate it not only to people outside your organization, but to other systems within your organization as well. Having outbound protection in place is typically a foundational service on which you can layer data loss prevention services, like making sure that users aren't intentionally or accidentally emailing confidential or proprietary information that they shouldn't be sending out by email. And as we talk about, outbound message being treated as the same as inbound messages, know that in services, cloud services like Microsoft 365 and Google Workspace, there's no such thing as an internal email anymore, right? So when you had your Microsoft Exchange or your Zimbra server or your Apple Mail server sitting in the closet in the back office, and Bob sends an email to the person, 3 cubes down, that email goes to the server, your client's connected, it goes to the physical box in the closet, it goes direct to the other client. It actually never leaves your business and your premise. It stays within that email server. Well, with Microsoft 365 and Google Workspace, effectively, even though your accounts are part of a domain and secured as part of a domain, technically, from a technical standpoint, when you send an email and it leaves your account and goes to someone else, it's going out and back in. And so you want that level of protection to be consistent for your people, no matter where the email is coming from. So many email servers and services, depending on the licensing and if it's cloud, Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace, will have outbound security features with an email server or the service. Many of our clients, for a variety of reasons, will also use a third-party service, often by gateway, to analyze, filter, and manage outbound email, not only for spam, virus, and threat protection, but as a foundation for data loss prevention, analysis, and services as well. And so looking at Microsoft 365 as an example, this is sort of a simplified diagram of the security infrastructure for email on Microsoft 365 in the service. So you see the inbound emails, the typical stuff we see. You can see it can support SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, both directions. Email comes in at the edge. You do your virus scanning, check the domain and the IP reputation. Internally to the Exchange component, which drives the email behind Microsoft 365, you're looking at valid connections and malware and data loss and spam and spoof intelligence to make sure it's not spoofed. All of that comes in before an email is declared safe. On the outbound side, You may be encrypting, again, spam policy, data loss protection services, if you have those as part of your license, and your rules about how you're going to route. You then go through your virus scanning. You look for backscatter detection. So, for example, if someone's sending me emails to bad addresses, knowing that they're going to get rejections, and they can determine a good email address from a bad one, and creating a lot of traffic. And so you have a whole range of services that sort of fit within that outbound protection that improve your reputation, improve the security of your environment. Oftentimes, you're preventing hackers from getting information that would support a future, more nefarious attack. Okay, so that's the system level of email security. Took a lot of time. Moving forward, let's take a look at the user level, identity access management, message level encryption, human factors and behavior, etc. And so when we talk about identity access management, the goal is to prevent unauthorized use of email accounts, right? So you do want multi-factor or two-factor authentication, knowing that, an authenticator app is more secure than texting codes, as are security keys that you physically carry. You want to protect your physical devices from access, so thumbprints, access codes to get onto your cell phone, force, mandatory login to get onto your laptops. And you also want to monitor third-party breaches. Why? Because we use our work email addresses as our username on third-party services, whether it's LinkedIn or Dropbox for business or other third-party services. If those services have a breach, hackers know that 70% or more of us will use passwords that are the same or effectively similar enough that they're easy to guess or calculate as those services. And so a breach in a third-party service can lead to a breach in your internal service. That's where the danger lies, particularly since those third-party breaches often disclose personal information that can also be valuable in a phishing attack. We say what we don't want you to do is provide API or account level access to other systems that may not be secure. So you may have this great tool that you use, and it's going to send out messages for you, and it's going to log in to your Gmail account or your Microsoft 365 account in order to send the email from your service. If that service is breached, your service is breached. So unless you're confident that that is as secure or more secure than your systems, don't connect it. Similarly, folks who use POP or POP3 to access their inbox, whether it's from a desktop client, or remotely, whatever, bad idea, because those clients tend to store that information in open text. And again, a system breach somewhere else can lead, or a system breach on your hardware could lead to access to your full identity and access management. Message level encryption, what is it? It's the encryption of individual email messages, including attachments. Typically, it can be triggered manually by a sender, either by clicking a button, that's an add-on to Outlook or to Gmail, or the encryption can be automated by policy and or heuristic algorithms that look at the content and the context of the message and decide if there's information that should be protected and encrypted. Why do you want message level encryption? Most people do it because they want to ensure that email stays private to the recipient, right? It provides a reasonable verification that the actual reader of the email is your intended recipient, right? This is the issue of, doctors aren't supposed to leave voicemails on home answering machines, because you never know if the person checking messages is the patient or a spouse or another relative or a friend who just happens to be in the room listening to it, right? Therefore, message level encryption is a key component to meet certain regulatory requirements, such as HIPAA, where you need reasonable verification that you're only sharing information with the intended recipient. Additionally, the use of policy-based encryption can mitigate issues with user-triggered encryption. So if you have a policy that says, hey, any time we send financial information to a client, we need to click the button to encrypt it, that's great. If someone forgets, behind the scenes, the policy should catch it and do the encryption as well. So as an example, we will do a lot of work with Zix, and their Zix Encrypt is a managed service for our clients. And you can see that in addition to human action, their policies and heuristics can trigger the encryption. Trusted recipients, those also on Zix, or who have a secure client, can receive without intervention. Everyone else receives through a portal, so it's a secure push. They get a message that there's a secure email message. They click the link. They validate their identity the first time they'll be asked to create a password, and then they log into a portal, either generically branded or branded to your company name, through which they can read the email, reply, and if you allow it, print and forward. They can also reply and add attachments, things of that nature. Every time they receive secure email from you, they'll use that same identity to access it through that same portal. Next at the user level is minimizing human risk. And that really falls into two categories that I had up before: human factors and behavior, and digital right management. So when we talk about human factors, we're talking about minimizing the risk of human error or malicious act. And this is important because right now, cyber attackers are using human factor engineering to design their attacks. And that's why they're so sophisticated and so successful. So this means you need to train your users, educate them on what the risks are, what to expect, and train them on how to recognize suspicious activity and what to do when they see that or they suspect they've clicked on something they shouldn't. Beyond that, we recommend testing. So sending controlled messages and seeing who clicks. And for people who click, it's not about punishment, it's about reinforcement of the human factors and the behavioral issues and continuing that education and support process. Digital rights management, some of the best we've seen is actually in the Microsoft 365 ecosystem that's really set up through email to stop unauthorized use of information. And this includes downloading, print, and forwarding. It's most often used to protect confidential and proprietary information, and you'll generally use rights management features. There are some third-party tools that can help you with this as well. This is often driven by compliance or by policy or by the need to protect intellectual property. And so when we talk about compliance, we'll look at it now from three angles: email security, backup recovery and continuity, and archive and e-discovery. Most people, when they hear email compliance, they only think of archive and e-discovery. But as you know, certain levels of email security are required by certain regulations: HIPAA, SEC and FINRA, CJIS, a lot of the DoD require certain levels and capabilities of email securities. Industry standards like PCI DSS, the credit card security and financial information industry standards, requires the levels of email security, as might your company policies for protecting your own information. When we look at backup and recovery, people say, gee, Microsoft's got all my emails in the cloud, or Google has all my emails in the cloud. Why do I need to back it up? Well, you might have a regulatory or an industry standard responsibility to do so. So for example, HIPAA requires one of the HIPAA tenets is that you have to be able to restore information. It can't just be secure, it has to be readily available, which means if something's damaged your systems, ready availability means you have the ability to recover it so it's available to you. Additionally, Microsoft, Google, almost every other email service vendor works on a shared responsibility model, meaning that Microsoft and Google are responsible for running and securing and protecting the data in the service for the purpose of service delivery. Making sure that your content is protected from user activity or application access and mistakes that can happen there is your responsibility. So the backups that Microsoft and Google run are there that if their environment has an impact, they can restore the environment to where it's working properly without you losing your data. Your responsibility is if someone goes in and starts deleting things they shouldn't, accidentally or on purpose, and recovering it. And because of that shared responsibility model, everyone who's got email in the cloud should be doing backup and recovery, no different than if you're running your own email service. Okay. Additionally, you might have company level needs related to business continuity, user support, and disaster recovery. Email vendors can offer this service. Most of our backup and recovery is done through third parties, which also provides a level of independence, the ability to restore to alternate locations, things of that nature. Now, the area that most people think of when they think about compliance is archive and e-discovery. This is not backup and recovery. Archive is going to capture, maintain, and hold content as sent and as received without modification, even if the content is deleted or altered in the email or other systems. And so the goal of archive and e-discovery is an as processed record that goes unaltered, right? And fundamentally, e-discovery, how you get that data out in and the content of the archive should be designed and compliant to meet federal regulations with respect to subpoenas. And that's really what it comes into. And regulation is the number one driver of archive and e-discovery services. Now, more industry standards are requiring that you're able to maintain a definitive record, and more companies are recognizing that email archives are an important tool for managing your information retention policies and procedures, for mitigating legal risks and other liabilities, and for policy enforcement. And the reason it's not backup and recovery is because archive and e-discovery systems are not designed to restore information back to inboxes and other folders properly marked and properly permissioned. Archive and e-discovery services capture the information. They have search tools, but the data out is designed to provide a delivery of content in response to a subpoena, along with reports and other documentation audit trails that demonstrate the information has not been tampered with. That's the purpose of archiving e-discovery. Yes, in some archive e-discovery tools, you can recall individual messages, but it's not the intent. It's not the purpose of the service. For that, it's backup and recovery. They are two different things, and they operate differently. Relying on archiving e-discovery to restore email in case of a disaster will, in and of itself, be a secondary disaster. That said, archive and discoveries will let you hold things, so even if it's scheduled to be deleted, if it's involved in a legal matter, it won't be deleted. The systems get pretty sophisticated, particularly around policy, information retention, policies and procedures, and risk mitigation. And again, some vendors offer their own archive e-discovery service with their email service. Most of our clients use a third-party service or a second tool offered by that vendor that's sort of separate and distinct. Google Vault archives in place and manages it that way. It's a successful system. It works. There's some caveats about how you use it and what you do with it. In the Microsoft environment, you can have archive and e-discovery built into your Microsoft 365 license, or you can use a third-party tool that may also be integrated with your backup recovery or your inbound-outbound protection. And so there are a number of options here, and it really depends on what's best for your business, which way you go. So what's the action item of all this? I've covered a lot of ground in about 45 minutes. Very verbal today. The first thing we always ask people to do is let's do the assessment. We'll help you with this. Let's look at your risk, the requirements of your business, legal, industry, company, those three tiers of guidance. So what do you need or what do you want and what are those priorities? Let's look at your risk and the level of protection that's appropriate. At that point, we can say, okay, here's what you need and want and how it's prioritized. Here's the cost, understand the benefit, but also look at the cost of inaction. If you don't change or update or tune your email security and compliance profiles to the needs of your business and something happens, and it's not if something happens, when something happens, what's the cost? What's the impact of inaction? And is that acceptable to you or is it not? Is another motivation to do something to make a change. From that point, you're going to plan your changes. It's not just the technology we're talking about. We've talked about the interaction with people, and we should make sure that your policies, whatever we implement, is aligned with your policies and vice versa, so that you don't have a policy that says you hold data for 3 years and you're holding it for 7, or you don't want a policy that says you keep email indefinitely and your technology is deleting it after 7 years. Right, so we'll make sure those policies match the technology and how they're operating. We'll make sure people understand this and that they also get the training they need so human action is less of a risk than it normally is. Once we have those planned out, we'll execute. And then you're up and running, you're good to go. So I've covered a lot of ground about email security and compliance. Certainly when we launched Cumulus Global back in 2006, it was all about the volume of spam overwhelming physical email servers. 95% of email was still on premise. Most of that was Exchange or Exchange compatible servers. And the volume of spam was saturating internet connections, which weren't as broadband and fast as they are now. And even consuming, disk space with the queuing and the non-delivery, responses, et cetera, could crash an Exchange server. It was that brutal, but it was all about spam. And then viruses came in and we started doing that. So a lot has happened. It's a lot more complex given the nature of on-premise and cloud and hybrid work environments. It's more complex given the nature of attacks and the sophistication in the financial upside to cyber attacks that we have today. And so it's important to make sure that our thinking and our actions are in line with the time. So for those of us who are watching this live, I'm going to do a little wrap up here for the folks watching on demand. Come back and take your questions. If you're watching this on demand, you have any questions or comments, you can contact us, info@cumulusglobal.com, or give us a call. My direct information is a falcon, if you will, at cumulusglobal.com. My phone number is on the screen. I will tell you I'm much better at answering emails than phone calls and messages. Send me an email myself, or if I'm busy for the day, I'll have a member of my team get back to you quickly. We'll answer your questions. We'll help you out. So for watching, if you're watching on demand, thanks for doing so. Appreciate you taking the time. And let us know if you have any questions or comments. At this point, I'm going to end the recording and thank you for joining us here today.